Yes, it is.
Okay, Your Honor, everything's ready to go.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Monday, March 8th City Council work session. Today, we've got a couple of items on our agenda. We're going to work on odor control updates, and it looks like also have a discussion on conflicts of interest. Quickly, I'll kick it over to Scott. Scott, anything to say to kick it off here?
Not really, Mayor. The council had asked for a quick update, and so we plan to do that with the odor control and leave most of the time this morning for the conversation around the council conflict of interest discussion. So really, we just have Sue Ann.
All right.
Mayor and Council, Sue Ann Donovan, the Deputy Neighborhood Services Director, I guess. I'm just going to give you a real brief update on odor control. We did an RFP. We had one response. We are currently working through the contract through the legal department. The contract would include, the first part would be training our inspectors on how to detect and an odor when we get the calls in. We did that training, I don't know, 20 or some years ago, and we haven't had any training since, but there is a science to training people to sniff odors and locate them and differentiate them. So that would be the first part of the contract. The second part of the contract would include testing of the air by the company around odor generators to determine sort of what the baseline for odor is in the city and where the significant odor generators are. And then we would use that as a way to set a bar for what we believe odor should be limited to in the city. And then go back to the companies and say, okay, here's the bar that we want you to meet, and show us how you're going to use best technology in order to reduce the odor that you generate to as closely come to that sort of threshold as possible. We think that's going to take about a year to get through the testing and the sort of setting that threshold, and then going back to the companies and starting to ask for plans on how they're going to meet the goal. So that's in a nutshell where we're at right now. We are still working on it. It's still moving forward. We're just in the contract negotiation stage right now.
All right, anybody have any questions, any thoughts?
Merrill County, this is Carl. Sue Ann, are you still looking at different vendors that might provide this? Is that part of what you're doing right now?
Well, we just got one vendor that submitted a proposal.
Okay.
And so we're going to try and work through them with our contract. If that fails, we may be able to, and I'll have to talk to finance, but we may be able to rebid out again and see if we can get somebody else interested.
Is that a company that's done this type of work in other communities?
Yes, I believe, yes, they have. Yep.
What kind of a company would do this, Sue Ann?
Well, there are, when I was doing research on it, there are a number of companies nationwide that do this for municipalities. They also do it for companies, so that when companies are building or expanding a plant, that they will do this ahead of time so that they can build those control measures into the plant when it's being constructed. So there are a number of companies out there that do this. A lot on the West Coast, and probably Denver area was another place that seemed to have a couple companies. One out of Louisville. So they're scattered.
Okay.
One more question. How many odor emitters do you think we have in the city of Des Moines?
I'd say there's 10 or 12.
So it'd be packing plants and grain.
Yeah, packing plants, rendering plants. I know that there's some concerns about the soybean drying facility up in the Northeast. Sometimes coffee roasters are targeted as an odor emitter. So it kind of runs the gamut.
Well, Carl, any other, Linda Westergaard, looks like your hand's up.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When the soybean plant on the Northeast side, like 4 years ago, people were all in an uproar about the smell. And I went to ADM and I went to the DNR and I went to Polk County Health because right now they're already being controlled by the county. I think it's the county public works that has to measure. They have something on top of their buildings that collects these odors or record them. And then they have to turn them in. And I know the state health department through believe it was through the DNR and through Polk County all regulate those smells. So I don't know what they're doing at places other than in Ward 2, but I know in Ward 2, the soybean plant is tested. I mean, they have a running test that's always on. And I know that I mentioned this a couple of years ago, Sue Ann, and said, are we working with Polk County or the DNR, or how are we coordinating it together?
Well, what the county and state are regulating is not odor. It is emissions of pollutants and air particles that cause pollution. The regulation of odor is different. Sometimes they work hand in hand, but they are not measuring odor, they're measuring pollutants. What we would get at is a different matrix that would directly measure odor.
But it was my understanding the pollutants are what causes the odor.
Not always true.
Okay.
They're two different things. And I was confused by that also when I started doing the research. And then as I dug into it and you start reading things from the industry, it's clear that pollutants and odor can be totally different and treated differently.
Thank you.
All right, anybody have anything else? All right, Sue Ann, thank you very much. Gives us a quick update on what's going on. And hopefully you'll have a chance to talk to the respondent to your RFP, and let's see how it is. And if we need to go back out, let's do it. But I think this is something that our citizens are concerned about from time to time, and I think it's good that we're getting on it. Scott, let's turn it over to you, and maybe Jeff to talk about conflict of interest.
Yeah, actually, Jeff is going to assist on this one. I believe the draft document was sent out, Jeff, at the end of January, showing the potential changes, the proposed changes to Division 3 of the council ethics code. So hopefully the council has had a chance to read through that. Jeff, did you want to give a high-level overview of how that's laid out, or?
Well, the reality is that we had prepared it, at least based on what we understood, you and I understood, Scott, the council to be telling us, and said that we would bring it back for placement on the agenda unless council wanted further discussion. And then several council members indicated they wanted further discussion. So I don't really have anything new or additional to add from the last time that we reviewed this. Happy to answer any questions, but I think it's really more time for council to discuss it and the potential merits and any other additional direction that they want to give to us. I would note that in one of the exceptions, our city code does define person to include all kinds of organizations, entities, corporations, LLC, partnership, anything like that. And I think when the discussion was had early on, the idea was, especially in the exception section, to have people as opposed to any other type of entity that are similarly situated, i.e. a homeowner, for example. And that's why the examples in 2109 sub A on the exception reference tax abatement and backflow preventer. But the way it reads now would apply, it could potentially apply to any entity depending on the program and how the program is set up. So we just want to make sure council's aware of that. If you want us to make it actual residents, we could change it to that term instead.
Jeff, can you just repeat that for me one more time? So as residents, or say that for me one more time.
Sure. In the exceptions, it does talk about family. I'm sorry, it talks about similarly situated persons or property, and we were drafting that from council's comments and discussion that was really to apply to persons meant people or residents as opposed to any entity that's defined broadly under our code as person. We can leave it this way. I just want to make sure council understands then that any entity would be able to, or there's at least an argument that any entity would be able to participate as long as it's the same as any other entity.
Thanks.
All right, I don't see any other hands up, but let's go ahead. And,
Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll raise my hand.
You got it. Go ahead, Josh.
So staying on that item, I mean, I certainly would prefer that to be persons. I think that was the intent and what I left the meeting thinking it was. I also have a question on.
Josh, let me interrupt just for a second. When you say you want it to be persons, you mean people, residents, as
people,
opposed to.
Right, correct.
Our code defines person very broadly to include all these other entities.
Right, sorry. I meant it to be people as yes. That was how I left it. And so it sounds like you need to figure out a way to carve out a definition so that there are different meanings here. The other question I had on this section was just related to what offered citywide to all other similarly situated. And my impression was that was limited to things like the tax abatement, where it could be unlimited, like everyone it would apply to everything. But that if we had a $50,000 grant program that a broad category of folks were eligible for, but there were only $50,000, that we would be taking council council members out of that. Is that how this is drafted?
Well, I think, again, that was probably the intent, but, like the backflow preventer program that's specified, my understanding, and Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that has a limited budgeted amount for each year. So we may need to change that to specify a little more clearly that as long as it's not a program that is going to run out of funds.
It is budgeted each year, but it's a very high amount. So I would have to check to see if we've ever been limited by the budget.
Well, and I would consider it different if, for example, there's certain things that are budgeted, like at the state level, the solar tax credit is limited to $5 million a year. But if you don't qualify in that year, you're first on the wait list for the next year. Now, it might not be authorized the next year, but I mean, if we have a high budget and we'd be committed to rolling anyone over to pay for the next year, I think that's different than if it's a limited budget and one-time funding. And maybe that's the definition, right? Or it's a limited budget annually that, like, if we're having to make choices about who might be able to get this, all I'm saying is if we have to make a choice and not all of our residents are going to be eligible, I think council should come out first. But if it's open to everyone broadly, and the criteria are such that anyone can apply, and the fact that lots of people apply isn't going to limit who's eligible, then I think it's fair for council to be eligible.
Okay, I think we can probably draft something like that if the rest of the council wants to see that revised.
All right, looks like Connie has her hand up. Connie?
I was just going to say, that's what I thought we were trying to get to, that if it's limited, if it's competitive in any way, that the council's out. But I think Josh explained it better, that if it's open to all, then the council should be able to get it. But if it is a limited amount, I think then we should be out of it. But if it's an ongoing program year after year, that's a guaranteed amount, then that could be another part of it.
All right, Linda.
Thank you. I guess my first question is, has this ever been a problem in all the years that the city's been doing business? Has it been a problem, or are we creating a problem? And I guess that's something I can ask legal, but it seems to me that if I qualify, or if a family member qualifies for something, and the applicants are based on their qualifications, whether it's a point system or whatever it is that city staff does, why would we knock somebody out? Why would we encourage someone to go somewhere else when it's a competitive process? I mean, they're rated on points, and if they have the number of points that qualifies for them, why would we exclude them? I find that very interesting. And I know that there have been programs where a council member's corporation has applied for it, and council voted it down because it was a conflict of interest, but that money was never even used. I mean, the next year we came around and said, well, because we don't have very many applicants, we're going to expand the program. Why would we deny a business, a corporation that's choosing to do business in the city of Des Moines just because they have a family member or somehow they're connected? I get the conflict of interest. I mean, I absolutely get it. if I'm gonna make money off of it, that's a completely different situation. But I'm talking about the facade program that would simply make our neighborhoods look better. Why would we exclude anyone from that? So I just question, it just seems like we're going to an awful lot of work for something that's never been a problem before.
So
That's my statement.
Mayor, if I could, this is Scott. So we
ahead.
have, yeah, we, obviously these programs are run by staff based on the guidelines that council have either put together or assisted on. So the reason for this conversation is so that staff are not put in a place where if there's discretion within a program on how to award the funds, we need clear guidance on how the council want to be treated within this policy. So there have been questions before with other programs. We are in a place where we're able to offer more and more programs that assist our local businesses. And so we feel great about that opportunity, but then it means there's a larger net of businesses out there that we're assisting that may somehow appear to be related to council members. So we need this clarity in this policy so that when there's discretion, and I think that's what Josh and Connie were saying, is it's the programs that do have discretion that are most concerning. The others are not. So I think that's helpful. I think we've got a good start here with this language. Let's just keep the comments flowing so we understand where the final answer might be on this policy.
Carl.
Thank you, Mayor County. So going back to Jeff's example on a backflow preventer. So I think I got a backflow preventer at our East Village home in 2006. And so were you talking about a limit of what could be reimbursed, or a limit of total dollars in that year? I guess this is a question to Jeff.
Well, I mean, Carl, we're just trying to figure out for sure what council wants. And the way I understood it was if there's a limit for, I mean, if the program already, like the backflow preventer, has a limit on the dollar value for reimbursement for each home, as I understand it. And so what we're talking about is if the entire program has a limited budgeted amount, how does council fit into that? And I think you know what I'm understanding here, at least so far, is that if it's a limited budget, one-time funding for programs, then council might be out. But if it's an ongoing program year after year, then council would be able to participate.
Right. So I think it was like I got reimbursed. Shoot, I can't remember now. I'll say $1,200, which I got a 1099 miscellaneous for. So, if I was to apply today, would I be eligible under the guidelines that you've drafted here?
It's called out as acceptable in the draft. If you could, Kay, down one page, section 2-109 calls it out. First A, part A.
So that was offered citywide
To all some other similarly situated persons or property.
Yeah. Okay.
Connie.
I just wanted to bring up on the whole issue of why I think we need a conflict of interest policy is when some of the questions came up, I asked I believe, Jeff, if we even had one comprehensive conflict of interest policy, and I don't believe we did. I think it's in different parts. And I think this is just good governance. And I think it really gives clarity not only to the staff, but it gives clarity to us. And so that's why I'm supportive of if there's some language you want to tweak, but I think we do need one as a council.
Any other questions? Anybody? Carl, is your hand back up?
It is. Thank you, Mayor County. So what would be the next steps here? I think we've asked Jeff for maybe one or two clarifications, and then would this come back? Would this be an agenda item for an upcoming council meeting?
Yes, that's what I'll do is in the next week or so, we'll get these amendments fleshed out, and then we'll reroute the draft to everyone, and kind of like we did the last time, unless we hear comments that if council wants to bring it back to a work session, we'll put it on the excuse me, we'll put it on the agenda in the draft form for council consideration.
Josh?
Yeah, I mean, if there aren't other questions, I mean, I was expecting there to be something else because I wasn't sure why this was delayed. But I wouldn't mind asking questions to just better understand how this applies in some scenarios. You know, one of the things, and I think the thing that gets a lot of interest from the public is when we have development agreements and provide incentives for businesses. And I'm curious how this applies in certain situations, and I know in the past, some council members have raised concern about, for example, the financing side of deals and someone being on council as well as and passing incentives and then potentially their employer financing that development agreement. If that was the case, Jeff, how does this policy apply?
Well, assuming that we know, just in the hypothetical, if we're assuming that we know that the financing is going to be conducted by a council member's employer, or engaged in by the council member's employer, then the council member would be prohibited from participating, taking any official act or action, and that's defined to include any deliberation, any communication of their position, anything. They would be prohibited from participating in that kind of a scenario.
What if we knew that the council member's employer was not necessarily planning to finance it, because in most cases financing is not secured in advance, but was planning on to compete for the financing?
Well, then that's one of the areas where this code becomes broader than past situations because of the prohibition on participation. If you look at section 2-108, that's on your screen, it extends to conflict of interest, apparent conflicts, appearances of conflict, and then any potential conflict. So in those scenarios, the council member is required to recuse himself or herself and can't deliberate or vote or participate, can't take any official act or action. So if they were going to compete for the financing, they may or may not be the ones that are going to get it, but they've got a potential conflict of interest at that point, or an appearance of a conflict, then they would be prohibited from participating.
So in that case, they would, if they were a likely, if their employer was a likely funder or likely to compete, they might need to, their employer might need to say, we're not going to fund this particular project in order for them to participate in council discussions leading up to it.
Yeah, I mean, if we're if you're talking about the realm of the universe of possibilities, I don't think that the code would reach that. If you're talking about the likelihood because the developers have maybe used that particular entity in the past or are anticipating using them and have already approached them as one of the potential financiers of the project, I think then you've got a problem for the council member participation, unless the entity says, no, we're not participating.
Connie?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up when we're going to bring it forward again, because this is, I think we first saw the first draft. This has been since, well, the final draft was 125. So I would hope we could get our questions answered and get it on our next scheduled meeting.
We will have the redraft done by then.
But I don't know if we really need another work session, I guess is what I'm saying. So I would like to get it on the next meeting.
Josh?
Yeah, just going back to that theme of application, I think we can do this for the general public as well. But my work as an environmental attorney has come up, at least with some of my colleagues, and I do think the appearance of conflict will have an impact in a couple of scenarios, and I wanted to go over those for clarity too. So I think there are a couple main pieces of my job. The bulk of what I do, for example, is cases at the Iowa Utilities Board. And I think now that as we are going through a comprehensive climate action plan, there are cities in other states that have intervened in cases at the Public Utility Commission in an effort to advance their climate goals. And while I don't think that would be a direct conflict if the city intervened in a case that I was already working in or that I was planning on working in, I do think that likely meets the appearance of a conflict standard. And I wanted to clarify that. I think, Jeff, we've talked about that, but wanted to clarify that for the record.
Yeah, I would agree that it would what I want to remind council of is that all of these, I mean, every time you have a conflict situation, it is highly dependent on the facts and circumstances of the particular situation that's involved, the particular transaction
right.
that's involved. So without pronouncing and putting myself in a corner, because as you see in the code, the opinions of the city attorney, and we're talking early written opinions, the opinions of the city attorney are binding on the city. So without prejudging one of those opinions and clarifying that it's highly fact specific,
yeah,
I would agree that yes, it would definitely meet the appearance of conflict of interest.
Yeah,
depending on the facts, it may or may not be an actual conflict if the city got in on the same case.
Yes, and let me clarify, I'm just talking broadly as a class of scenario that in the future we would want to explore and get a ruling on, or to avoid it, to be overly cautious and just, for example, if the city was contemplating that type of legal action, I think I would just with this policy in place, I would just sit out of that discussion, regardless of whether or not it was going to become a conflict or an appearance of a conflict.
Sure, that makes sense.
Similarly, I think the other example that I can think of where it would be appropriate for me to avoid discussion, I do register on bills up at the Capitol, and I think that again likely falls in that appearance category. So just wanted to be clear about those examples. And I think this policy provides value for that reason.
If there's no other questions, Mayor, I can certainly we'll get to work on the redraft and get that out.
Okay, Jeff, I don't know that I have a question, but I would like to have you, if you can, kind of go over that categorical list of people that whether they be family or they be, how deep does that go? I know that there has been a question regarding conflict because of a name. If somebody's name was Smith, I guess if we had a Smith on city council, it would be questioned as to whether that is it. But I think you've been pretty clear as to how deep that goes to direct family, whatever. Would you go over that again? Because sometimes if it might be 6 points removed, I mean, while people might have the same name, it starts getting a little bit challenging to decide how far out we go with this.
Right. That's a great question, Mayor. The way that the code reads, and first let me preface it. In doing research on different city codes, it was not necessarily the majority, but it certainly wasn't uncommon for cities to go as far as what's called the 4th degree of consanguinity. And so if you just go each step, yourself to your parent to their sibling, that would be 2 steps, to your aunt or uncle, then down to their cousin, that's 3 steps. And so many codes went to the 4th degree of consanguinity in terms of finding a presumed interest. But a lot of them didn't. And so what we've defined out is really based on the conversation we had with council initially, is really about the 2nd degree of consanguinity. And so for family, you're talking about the spouse, your children, stepchildren, and grandchildren, parents, step-parents, and grandparents, and then any immediate household member. If you have somebody that's living with you, even if they're not related to you, there's going to be a presumption of a conflict if they're in your household, whether they're within that degree of consanguinity or not. So that's as far as it goes. The name, when you get to a 4th or 5th or 6th cousin, there is no legal conflict. There would not be a legal conflict under this code. There is no legal conflict under the state. I know that many of our commenters at the last several meetings have complained about family relationships that are quite distant, and most of the time the council has abstained. But I don't even think that's necessary when you get that far away. It's certainly not required under state law.
Anybody else have anything else that they'd like to bring up this discussion and consideration by legal? Because I think it's important that as council members have pointed out, that we move this forward so that it is apparent that we've been working on it. Josh, again, see your hand up.
Oh, well, just to the point that you raised, Mr. Mayor, I mean, if other communities have gone farther in terms of degrees of sanguinity, I always mispronounce that.
Consanguinity.
Sanguinity, thank you, consanguinity. If others have gone farther, I wouldn't be opposed to aligning us with best practice and putting that in our policy as we update it, if that's going to help give the public more faith in what we do.
Listen, hey, Mayor, there's only a small fraction of the public that maybe doesn't understand the relationships to what we're speaking of, and the immediate family, I think, goes far enough, in my opinion. I don't think we need to go to brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles. I think that's a little misstep. So I would be opposed to if we go any further than what this is.
I think from what Joe, I'm sorry, I missed your hand coming up, so I'm sorry I didn't call on you. But the brothers, sisters certainly is a direct conflict based upon what Jeff just outlined, I think. Am I wrong, Jeff?
But we didn't go to brothers and sisters unless they're in your household.
Okay. All right. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't think that the brother and sister aspect was in there. I think we just went to immediate family only in your household. And I think that I think that steps out far enough into what we're unleashing as a conflict of interest. So I would be supportive of that. If we're going to make it steeper, then yeah, I guess we need to have it come back and have some more discussion about it.
Jeff, in terms of that definition you gave us just a moment ago, the brother sister would be pretty close.
It would be that when we initially started that, we got feedback, varying degrees of feedback from council, and so that's why we drafted it this way. It can go either way. I mean, you could limit it to just those in your household. You can go out further, include brothers and sisters. That would be within the second degree of consanguinity. So that's not all the way to like nieces and nephews.
Although that would be close, nieces and nephews would be certainly steps. What would you say? That'd be second or third step, wouldn't it?
Sure.
If we went to that fourth step,
you're at least to the third step with nieces and nephews.
Okay. All right, Linda.
And just for clarification, and what we're talking about here is that council members wouldn't vote or take part in conversations if a family member had applied for something and it comes before city council.
Correct.
Okay.
Josh?
Yeah, I was just wanting the clarification, and Jeff, you said that, so we're not even totally at second degree consanguinity, but it goes to some policies go all the way to fourth, is what you
Correct.
said?
Correct.
Like that's the most transparent out there is fourth.
I didn't find any didn't find any beyond fourth.
And just so we're all clear, fourth, what would fourth cover?
Fourth would get you get to like second cousins. It would get you to your cousins. It would get you to the children of your nieces and nephews. That's about how far it would go. But when you're getting into, you know, second cousins twice removed, that it's not going to address that.
Yep. Thank you. And like I said, I would have comfort going to pushing the limits of what the practice has been nationally. So if there are others that have done that, I'd be comfortable doing that.
Linda, is your hand up again?
No, it's not. I'll lower it.
Okay, thank you. All right, anybody else? Carl?
Thank you, Mayor County. So can you clarify one more time, Jeff? So we're at third level right now, and is that what we're discussing, to stay with that?
No, we're not at, we didn't go the consanguinity route. We went with specifically, after the comments from council, we went specifically with specified family relationships. So for example, the brother sister example, that would be within the second degree of consanguinity, but they're not included. Because that was the way the discussion went. At least that's what Scott and I took from it. But we went with a specified family relationship as opposed to the level of consanguinity.
Jeff, and that's found under the definitions, right? The first page.
Correct.
Well,
Yeah.
so it would help us if Kay could move to the page that's on. So
First page under definitions.
there we go. Thank you.
Under 2106,
Thank you.
immediate family. So if your brother or sister lived in the house, same house as you, then you would have the prohibited conflict.
Hmm.
I
Well,
gotta tell you,
in terms of voting, I might feel better if, again, Linda brought up a good point. This is in terms of voting on a motion or a program or something. It might be good to have brothers, sisters, stepbrothers, stepsister included in this.
for the appearance.
Yeah, for the appearance, yeah. You know, in a case like that, they could have a different last name, and
Okay. Joe?
I'm hearing crickets. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Mayor and Jeff, you know, I don't have a whole lot of history. I mean, I've been doing it for 7 years. I know if there's an appearance of a conflict, if there's even an appearance, I know over the last 7 years, without a policy in place, other council members, including myself, have stepped aside and said, I'm not voting on this issue. So, I mean, to have you know, if everyone feels better that they need a policy to tell them to do what's right as far as an appearance of a conflict of interest, then I guess you can make it as much as you want to make it. But I mean, it typically stands in how you feel. And there just hasn't been a lot of problems with this. And I think Linda pointed that out. But if it makes everyone feel better, yeah, but do whatever you think. But I haven't seen a problem in that. and Mayor, you've been doing this a hell of a lot longer than I have. You would probably be able to tell us over the last 20 years how much that's come into play.
Bill, you're the only one that hasn't said anything today. Any thoughts?
Well, thank you, Mayor. I've said this before. If I have any doubt, I got Jeff Lester's telephone number. I can get the best advice I can get right from the horse's mouth. And I don't mean that in a literal sense, but Jeff's a smart guy. That way I explain the situation, over and done with. I think that's my goal. I don't know if there's, I mean, I'm tickled to death. I've got all my kids living here in Des Moines. All my brothers and sisters live in Des Moines. I think Des Moines is a great place for people to grow and expand their families, and I want to keep that going. I just want to make sure we don't put any roadblocks for kids to want to grow and expand in Des Moines. And so if I ever get in that situation, I'm going to call Jeff. That makes sense?
I think
I'm
that
just
gives
happy
you
that you
clear
didn't-
clarification.
I'm just happy that you didn't equate me to the other end of the horse, so.
We're only talking about the horse's head.
That's exactly right.
Linda?
I just have to say, I gotta agree with Bill. You know what? I have all of my family is here in Des Moines. A lot of us don't have any idea what our other family members are doing business-wise. It's simply none of our business. But I'm not sure why we feel the need that we have to get a policy in place when we all know what the right thing to do is. You know, I would never vote on anything that any of my family members had anything to do with. Other than maybe tax abatement, you know, those are all bundled together and we vote on it all at once. But I just think that we're making something out of nothing. I mean, it's not been a problem. Why are we spending our time trying to target people? I guess I just don't understand why we're not encouraging as much development and growth in our city as possible. Why do we feel the need that we've got to put a policy that, you know, if I'm a council member and I work for somebody and that business wants to come before council for something, that I have to vote, you know, recuse myself? It just doesn't make sense. It's not a problem that I have ever seen. And I've been following city politics for a long, long time, and I've never seen it be a problem.
Connie?
I think that we all have, to me, I think that if it's not a problem, it shouldn't be hard to vote on something like this. I think it's good governance, as I said before. And I do think that we have to understand that when we go in and we ask for things, or people, there are immediate families go in and ask for things, it's for clarity so staff knows what to do, or it's for us to understand that it's not just for this group, it's for ongoing councils. So I really don't know what problems existed before. I believe this is, again, I go back to good governance that we should have in place so there's clarity and that we're upfront and out front on what we believe. And that's why I think it's important to pass something like this. It's not about what has happened in the past, it's what we should be doing, I think, as a council going forward today and forward to other councils.
Linda, your hand up again?
It is. I just have to say, what I think we as a council should be doing is working to lower people's tax rates in our city. And we need to either raise taxes or you have to invest in our community. And that means new housing, new businesses. We have to want to bring people to our city. And that's what city council should be doing. My constituents ask me, what are you gonna do to keep my taxes down? What are you gonna do about all the vacant buildings that we've got in our community? I mean, I've got a whole list of them here in Ward 2 that people are saying, why do we have to have so many vacant buildings? We as a city need to, policy is good and I'm all for it, but I'm gonna spend my time working on what I can do to make my neighborhoods better and to make my entire community better. That's all I have to say.
All right. Don't see more hands up to Jeff and to Scott. Do you have enough input that we can finalize this and we can move it forward and be done with it? And or do you think that we need to put it down in draft form and bring it back yet again for further discussion? I'd sort of like to move it ahead.
Jeff, I think we can take a stab at a couple more edits that we would then bring back for a vote.
Yeah, what I would suggest is we'll draft it up, and if there's anything that council, a majority of the council, because obviously we have some differing opinions here. So if there's anything that the majority of the council wants to do differently from the draft that Scott and I submit, they'll be able to amend it on the floor.
Okay. Does anybody have any last comments? If not, we've got a city council meeting this evening. Are we going to have any closed session? Jeff?
We do, Your Honor. We have a closed session at 3:30 and then we have housing at 4:15.
All right. Jeff, 3:30 give you enough time, or do you want to start a little earlier?
No, it's posted at 3:30. I think that'll be enough time, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Good. All right, everybody. Thank you all for attending, and to any of our other attendees, thank you. And I think we had a good discussion this morning, and look forward to all of us getting together for our city council meeting this evening. Until then,